My name is Alex. I'm 22 years old. While I was studying abroad, my parents sold my car to pay off my cousin's debt. Their excuse? You weren't using it anyway, right? I was furious, but stayed quiet and took legal action. What they didn't know was that the car was still legally in my name. When the new owner tried to register it, they hit a dead end. Now my parents are panicking, my cousin is furious, and I'm just wondering, was I too petty, or did they deserve it? I was just a kid from a small town when I got the chance to study abroad in Italy, a dream come true wrapped in the excitement of adventure. But as I stood in a quaint Florentine cafe, the aroma of espresso filling the air, my heart sank with the weight of an email that changed everything. My beloved Mustang, the symbol of my independence, was sold by my own family to cover a debt I knew nothing about. The betrayal stung, but it was Mark's cryptic warning that haunted me. Keep an eye on the Mustang, cousin. You might need it more than you think. Now back home, I'm faced with a family in turmoil, legal threats, and a decision that could either mend or break us apart. What was I going to do about this betrayal? My name is Alex, and at 22, I've always had this itch for adventure, a burning desire to see what lies beyond the familiar. So when the chance came to study abroad in Italy for a semester, I didn't hesitate. My parents, Linda and Tom, were supportive, though I could see the worry in their eyes as they thought about me being so far away. They threw me a small farewell party filled with laughter and goodbyes, but there was one notable absence: my cousin Mark. Mark, a year older than me, had always been the family's wild card, often finding himself in situations that my parents would have to smooth over. As I packed my bags, the weight of leaving home truly hit me. My dad, with a knowing smile, handed me the keys to my beloved car, a sleek black 2010 Ford Mustang. "Take care of her, Alex," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and concern. I promised I would, not knowing then how those keys would soon become the catalyst for a family storm. The night before my departure, the house was quiet, the air thick with unspoken words and the scent of my mom's homemade cookies. I remember sitting on my bed, the room filled with the shadows of my childhood, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark, cryptic and out of the blue. "Keep an eye on the Mustang, cousin. You might need it more than you think." I didn't understand what he meant, but there was something in his tone, a hint of urgency that made me uneasy. What could possibly go wrong with a car sitting in a garage? As I zipped up my suitcase, the reality of leaving home hit me. The first few months in Italy were a whirlwind of new experiences. I was too caught up in the beauty of Florence and the thrill of studying art history to think much about home. Every day was a new adventure, from exploring the Uffizi Gallery to tasting the finest gelato in hidden corners of the city. But one evening, while sipping espresso in a quaint cafe, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line was ominously vague: "Important family matter." Opening the email, I read with growing disbelief. My parents had sold my car to pay off a debt Mark had accrued. "You weren't using it anyway, right?" they wrote, trying to soften the blow. The shock was palpable. That car was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of my independence, a gift for my high school graduation. It was the first thing I had ever owned outright, a tangible piece of my identity. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal, but I decided to keep my cool. I replied with a simple, "We need to talk when I get back." Sitting there, the espresso now cold, I couldn't help but replay Mark's cryptic message in my mind. "Keep an eye on the Mustang, cousin. You might need it more than you think." What had he known? What had he done? The betrayal stung, not just because of the car, but because it felt like a breach of trust from my own family. I looked around the cafe, the chatter of Italian voices a stark contrast to the silence that had fallen over my thoughts. What was I going to do about this betrayal? The question lingered, as heavy as the espresso cup in my hand. Upon returning home, the atmosphere was tense. My parents tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the absence of my car in the driveway was a glaring reminder. Over dinner, I confronted them. Their explanation was weak. They had used the money to bail Mark out of yet another financial mess. I could see the strain in their eyes, the way they avoided looking directly at me. "We thought you wouldn't mind," my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were away, and Mark, he needed help." The twist came when I revealed that the car was still legally in my name. I had never transferred the title to them, a detail I had overlooked when I left for Italy. My parents were stunned, their faces paling as if they'd seen a ghost. And Mark, who had been silent, exploded in anger. "You could have just let it go, Alex," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. The new owner, a man named Mr. Jenkins, had tried to register the car, but was met with bureaucratic resistance due to the title issue. My parents were now in a bind, facing potential legal repercussions for selling a car they didn't legally own. The reality of the situation began to sink in. I could see the fear in my parents' eyes, the realization that their actions might have consequences far beyond a simple family squabble. "What are we going to do?" my dad asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own question. The implications were severe. If Mr. Jenkins decided to pursue legal action, they could be looking at charges of fraud or misrepresentation. Not to mention the financial strain. They'd already used the money to help Mark, and now they might have to pay back Mr. Jenkins or face a lawsuit. Mark, for his part, looked like he wanted to disappear into the woodwork. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen silence that spoke volumes. I could see the regret in his eyes, the understanding that his actions had not only affected him, but dragged the entire family into a mess. As I sat there, watching the tension unfold, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and family arguments. My parents were desperate, trying to negotiate with Mr. Jenkins, who was understandably furious about the situation. Mark was sulking, feeling betrayed by both me and our parents. I, on the other hand, was torn between my anger and the familial bond I still felt. During a heated discussion in our living room, my mother pleaded, "Alex, can't you just sign over the title? We'll make it right with you somehow." But I was resolute. "This isn't just about the car. It's about trust, Mom. How could you do this without even talking to me?" The tension was palpable, and the air was thick with unspoken accusations and guilt. My dad, usually the voice of reason, was uncharacteristically silent, his eyes darting between us, his face etched with worry. Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up, his voice low and filled with regret. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could handle it, but it got out of control." His admission did little to ease the tension, but it was a crack in his usual facade of indifference. I looked at my family, their faces a mix of desperation and hope. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "We need to fix this." "Alex," my dad finally said, his voice cracking, "we can't afford a lawsuit, and Mr. Jenkins is not a man to take lightly. He's already threatened to go to the police." The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me. I thought about the Mustang, not just as a car, but as a symbol of my independence, my first real possession. Yet, here I was, caught in a web of family loyalty and legal entanglements. I stood up, pacing the room, feeling the eyes of my family on me. "I'll talk to Mr. Jenkins," I decided aloud. "Maybe we can work something out without involving the authorities." The climax came during a family meeting at our lawyer's office. Mr. Jenkins was there, his face a mask of frustration. The lawyer explained the legal implications. My parents could face charges for fraud, and Mark's debt was still unresolved. In a moment of clarity, I decided to take control. "Here's what we're going to do," I announced. "I'll sign over the title to Mr. Jenkins, but on one condition. Mark pays back every cent of his debt to my parents, and they, in turn, compensate me for the car's value." There was a stunned silence. My parents looked at me with a mix of relief and guilt, while Mark's face turned red with anger. Mr. Jenkins, however, nodded in agreement, seeing a resolution in sight. I could feel the tension in the room, like a thick fog that wouldn't lift. My parents, Their expressions, a blend of hope and shame, seemed to shrink under the weight of the situation. My mother's eyes were red, not just from crying, but from the strain of the past weeks. My father, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a look of defeat, kept his gaze on the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mark, on the other hand, was a storm of emotions. His anger was palpable, his fists clenched so tightly I thought he might break something. "You think you can just dictate terms now?" he spat out, his voice laced with bitterness. "After all this, you want to play the hero?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision. "Mark, this isn't about playing hero. It's about fixing what's broken. We're family, and we need to stick together, not tear each other apart over mistakes." Mr. Jenkins, his voice surprisingly calm, spoke up. "I appreciate the effort to resolve this, Alex. But understand, this isn't just about the car anymore. It's about trust and the integrity of transactions. I need to ensure that my interests are protected." The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the room. "This proposal could work, but we need to ensure all parties agree." In the weeks that followed, I watched as Mark begrudgingly started paying back his debt. It was a slow process, each payment a reminder of the turmoil he had caused. My parents, feeling the weight of their actions, began the slow journey of repairing our relationship. They started with an apology, their voices heavy with regret, promising to respect my possessions and decisions in the future. It was a start, but trust, once broken, is hard to mend. I sold the car to Mr. Jenkins, who was grateful for the resolution. The money from the sale was placed in a trust fund for my future, a small consolation for the betrayal I felt. It was a bittersweet moment, watching the Mustang drive away, knowing it was the right thing to do, yet feeling the sting of loss. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized that while my actions might have seemed petty, they were necessary to establish boundaries and respect within my family. The car was just a catalyst for much-needed change. I had stood my ground, not just for the sake of a car, but for the principle of respect and responsibility. Was I too petty, or did they deserve it? Perhaps it was a bit of both, but in the end, it was about standing up for myself and ensuring that my family learned a valuable lesson in respect and responsibility. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the tension in our home began to ease. My parents made efforts to involve me in decisions, asking for my opinion on matters that would have previously been decided without my input. Mark, for his part, seemed to have learned his lesson, his demeanor more subdued, his actions more thoughtful. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in months. My mother, with a hopeful smile, said, "Alex, we've been thinking. Maybe we could all go on a trip together just to reconnect, you know?" I looked at them, seeing the sincerity in their eyes, the genuine desire to heal. "Maybe," I replied, not fully committing but open to the possibility. The journey to mend our family bonds was far from over, but the steps we were taking were in the right direction. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you